So before industrialization came along, musicians were basically people that made instruments and played them. I'm sure sometimes they made them and, you know, gave one to somebody else and like that, but basically being involved in music prior to, you know, very specialized systems of class and stuff that Europeans came up with. Musicians built things to make sound with and made sound with them, and shared them around and all that. And I'm sure it was a much more interesting world at that time. Wherever you went, there was something a little bit different. You know, there's really only basically, you know, this is according to, oh, I can't remember the name, Hansbagel and Sachs had a classification for the families of instruments, and there's basically only 4 kinds of instruments, which are, you know, wind instruments and drums and bars of particular lengths and strings, you know, and then there's a multitude of variations on these. And I suspect in those days, wherever you went, somebody had done it a little bit differently. The principles of physics are basically the same, so they would tend to have some similarity amongst each other. And I'm sure it was interesting for musicians to travel around and try whatever version of the oud they had in this town as opposed to the version a couple of 100 miles away. You know, maybe had not as many strings, and maybe the, you know, the fretboard was longer or shorter or whatever, you know. And I think that's, well, for me, obviously, that's kind of an integral part of making music, is making the thing that makes the sound, as well as just taking this pre-constructed and preconceived and thing and doing the same, you know, going through the same steps as millions of other people have done. It's, there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, I came up playing guitars and pianos and saxophones and, you know, drum sets and what have you, you know. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but it wasn't always like that. You know, that is a construct that was kind of applied, you know, and applied by basically an elite class. You know, an elite class could afford to have a set of instruments and pay people to make the same instrument multiple times and training people to perform upon them. But that's a very different thing, you know, probably on the downside of town in those same days. There were people making what they could out of what they had and making their music with it. None of that really comes down to us because, as we all know, history's written by the rich people. And so what the other folks were doing is just kind of, you know, dismissed in that way. I don't want to know about what the rich are doing. Joe Strummer. The other thing was more, you know, the people's thing, whatever you want to call it. A lot got left out of what being a musician was by the system that chose a set of instruments and trained people to play them. They had an agenda, you know, which was their own entertainment. And that's cool, you know, and they did a lot of great stuff with it. I'm not knocking it. But they didn't care about, you know, they didn't care about what was going on in the other people's lives. They wanted to put on puffy wigs and, you know, to me, very silly looking clothing and you know, do the minuet or whatever. And they set up a system that supported that, you know. But that system left out a whole lot of other stuff. And so, in a sense, what I'm interested in doing and engaged in doing is there are other possibilities that may have been forgotten and other possibilities that were deliberately forgotten and even probably deliberately suppressed. I'm sure they made laws against people having bands, and, you know, kind of like Christians used to want to ban rock and roll, and now they just want to have Christian rock and roll because that didn't work. Or the, you know, oh, the mullahs in Iran wanted to ban a lot of music, you know. So, you know, what slipped through all these cracks, and we have no way of knowing. You know, we'll never know what anybody did in some small village somewhere, you know, where nobody gave a shit because he was just, you know, just some working person, you know. So anyway, you know, the thought of this is it might be interesting to check this out. And that's kind of, you know, that's kind of basically all I'm doing is checking out what might be and what might have been, you know, from a different perspective of, you know, not accepting the set of instruments that the upper class chose for their entertainment a couple of hundred years ago, and right now in the present, not accepting the instruments that, you know, the new upper class, which is, you know, corporations, have chosen for us to play. You know, we can be very much more autonomous than this, and in a political sense, I think that we need to start being more autonomous on more levels. It's not what we say that's important, and it's sort of how we do it, you know, how we live our lives. And, you know, this is very obvious in food now, you know, that we want our, you know, people that are supporting our sustainability are going to farmers markets instead of the supermarket. And, you know, maybe we should do that with music. For me is, you know, sonic nutrition, psychological nutrition, whatever you want to call it. So I kind of think of that in the same way. You know, if I had an unlimited amount of energy and yeah, basically that, I would just spend all day making things, and then I would travel around and sell them at flea markets and hope to generate out of this a kind of music that comes up from the bottom instead of that has been imposed upon us from the top. And it has been imposed upon us from the top, and, you know, if we want to have things stop working that way, this top-down way, which I think is killing the planet, and, you know, it's certainly depressing the hell out of everybody. You know, if we want to, like, stop having things that way, we need to look for opportunities to be autonomous in what we do. You know, I've always just wanted to be a musician since I was like 9 years old. You know, that's kind of the only thing I ever really wanted to do. You know, I've done a lot of other things to make a living and whatnot, and enjoyed them all, you know. But really what always gave, like, kind of direction to my life was to be a musician and to make music. And this has been as autonomous as I've gotten in this so far. You know, I've also sought autonomy all my life because, you know, I'm just a recalcitrant dude, as my friend used to call me. But wouldn't it be nice if we, the people, you know, not those motherfuckers, you know. If we the people like took over our means of production in this, you know, the same way that when organic farming was catching on, like, oh, the snotty people wouldn't touch it because, oh, you know, there's shit on this egg, or like, you know, this is dirty, and these carrots aren't as phallic as the kind I can get at the supermarket, and stuff like that. All this kind of naysaying that comes from the status quo. And you know, you certainly get that in music when you do different music. You know, you go, oh, that's not, yeah, that's just noise, you know, or whatever. All the kind of naysaying is going to come into that, and but I think that we should do this the same way. I think that when people started doing that with food, they kind of began something, and we kind of like push back a little at our corporate dominated lives. And we can think we can do this by, like, oh, voting for some people or signing some petitions, or, you know, that's all good to do. But we really have to kind of take back our lives, you know, and take back the things that are important to us. You know, for somebody that will be the food. For me, it's obviously making music. You know, for somebody else, it'll be, you know, well, a lot of people are doing this, making their own, like, TV and generating their own entertainments, and you know, different kinds of buildings. You know, somebody says, no, I'm not going to go with this, like, standard procedure, you know, make house, I'm going to try straw bales, or I'm going to, you know, build an earthship or whatever. You know, this is all good stuff. And if we want the world back, we're going to have to, like, do this in as many places as we can. And I think we should want the world back. I think we should do what we can to sort of rescue it from, oh, all these just status quo ways that are, you know, if you look at it, they're really failing. You know, the way of doing things, the prescribed way of doing things, isn't working very well. It's not making people happy. It's causing, you know, endless amounts of destruction. That way, you know, another Joe Strummer quote is, there's nothing there, I'm sure of it. And so yeah, let's consider this. And, you know, like, you know, what I do isn't an answer, it's my contribution to an answer that we'll all eventually make together. And we should all chip in on making this answer that we'll all eventually make together. You know, maybe there isn't an answer anyway, you know, but it's more fun to try to get to one than it is to just give up. Yeah, I guess that's about it.